Remaining member of the Commonwealth Club for just $10 a month. Join today.
They said when you see, said we'll have a short video. That was like a blink. Well, good afternoon and welcome to the program with the Commonwealth Club and its programming branch in Forum. I'm Brenda Wright, a member of the Board of Governors for the Commonwealth Club. And today we have two audiences. We have one virtual, so welcome and hello, everybody. And for those of you that have joined us here, I just can't tell you how happy I am to see you. I said I wasn't gonna go on and on about I'm so glad to see people. But, you know, it's just like your first day when your parents let you ride the bus by yourself. Today. This is our first in-person program that we've done in our beautiful building since March 2020. And we're thankful to all of you that decided to come and join us in person. You know, despite that shelter in place that left our doors closed most of the last year, our staff and the leadership here at the Commonwealth Club worked hard to continue to bring us together for some fascinating educational and entertaining programs. We're thrilled to open our doors again to you this summer and beyond, so not just today, you can come back other times, so that, you know, to celebrate civility, curiosity, and perseverance. And I would say that perseverance is really the word. In the coming months, we'll have more programs like this, in person and virtual audiences. And we're just so honored to have you here. When I was saying this, I said, God, am I gonna sound mushy? But we're just so honored to have you here, that you've chosen the Commonwealth Club. So I just wanna see how many of you is this your first real outing? Those of you that are home, I don't see you, but okay, well, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Now, and what a way to kick it off, but talking about barbecue. Now, you probably would never expect to have this at the Commonwealth Club, to talk about barbecue. We're in for a treat today because we'll hear from the James Beard Award winner, food writer, and soul food scholar, Mr. Adrian Miller. And I think I'm a soul food scholar too. My friends will tell you that. His new book, Black Smoke, African Americans and the United States of Barbecue, chronicles the often mistold story of a beloved tradition barbecue. Now, I'm from St. Louis. And the folks in St. Louis, he's doing this with his head, the folks in St. Louis will tell you that they make the best barbecue ever. When I was looking at this and they were talking about Mr. Horn being a pitmaster, I was like, oh, no, my granddaddy was a pitmaster. He had his own grill, which you couldn't touch. He cut the wood, soaked the chips, put them aside. I don't know what he soaked them in, but anyway, and made the sauce. But I will say to you that some of my best memories were around going to what we call barbecues. As Adrian states in his book, this is a story of entrepreneurship, culinary innovation, and most importantly, the tenacity of the Black community. Now, Mr. Cohen, who is my granddad, he would say it's about Black people making a way out of no way. That's what he would say. Today, Adrian is going to be in conversation with food writer and columnist for the San Francisco Chronicle, Justin Phillips. Now, I have instructions I have to give you. You know, during this week, everybody's got to learn to give instructions. In the last 15 minutes of this conversation, you will get a chance to ask Adrian a live question. If you're here in our headquarters, Justin will let you know you can quietly line up in the back of the room to ask a question. If you're watching online, please type your questions in the chat section of the live stream. And we're gonna try to get through as many questions as possible. Now to the good part. And I'm sorry, people at home that are with us virtually. Following the program, we invite you to a special barbecue after party on our rooftop with food provided by Horn Barbecue. Legendary pitmaster Matt Horn and his wife Nina will also be joining us upstairs. We're in conversation with Justin. Matt will detail his rise as a superstar in the culinary world and what barbecue means to him. When we get to the roof, Adrian will also be signing copies of his books, so I hope everybody got one. We won't be lining up, helping you line up to get your book signed. Within your books, there is a number, and please kind of keep an ear out for when your number is called, because that's when you will come up to the signing booth to get your book signed. So just finally, on behalf of the Commonwealth Club, a very special thanks to you, our community, for your support. To learn more about the Commonwealth Club, please visit us at commonwealthclub.org. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Adrian Miller and Justin Phillips to the Commonwealth Club. Thank you.
Well, that was a great way for us to enter the stage, and I feel like we have our work cut out for us. People were promised food after this.
I know, we're between them and the food.
right,
Gotta
we're
make it
between
tight.
you guys. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's program with Inforum and the Commonwealth Club. This is the first in-studio audience in 15 months. I'm Justin Phillips, a columnist for the San Francisco Chronicle. Today, I'm honored to be in conversation with food writer, James Beard Award winner, attorney, and certified barbecue judge, Adrian Miller. This is off to a good start.
Yeah.
No one's thinking about the food.
Yeah, the certified barbecue, that's the best conversation starter I've ever
I
had.
mean, absolutely. In honor of the 4th of July, we're here to explore an inherently American tradition, Southern barbecue. The history of barbecue is a smoke-filled story of Black perseverance, culinary innovation, and entrepreneurship. It's also, like many things, a misunderstood story. We are here to learn about the real history of barbecue in America and the critical role that African Americans have played in that story. At the end of the conversation, like we said earlier, you will get the opportunity to ask questions. I will let everyone know when we're ready, and when I do, you can line up slowly in the back of the room. If you're watching virtually, please ask your questions in the chat, and we'll get through as many as possible. Now let's rock and roll. So one of the things that I want to do with Adrian, before we get into the book, your background is so unique to me that I kind of want to ease into this before we get into the details. Also, everyone should read the book too, so I don't want to give everything away.
Right.
So we're going to start here. Before you Before you became Adrian Miller, as the food world knows you, you were in the world of politics, even doing work with the Clinton administration. Am I right?
Yes.
So I wanted to ask, which is harder, being in a room where you have to develop policies that affect millions of people, or telling one person the history of barbecue?
Oh, man. I think it's telling one person the history of barbecue.
And why is that?
Because a lot of people don't really pay attention when you're doing the policy until you get to the end result. With barbecue, people come in with their own preconceived notions of what it is, how to do it right. And so, part of the fun is the arguing about barbecue. But what I found is a lot of people really don't know the true history of barbecue, but they are dead set on what they think it is.
Everyone has really strong beliefs when it comes to this topic.
Yeah.
I mean, I was going into the book knowing I was going to be educated, and also knowing that I would probably want to have a fist fight whenever we got to meet each other.
That's part of it.
That's part of the education. So one of the things that I also want to talk about too is I feel like Adrian has like a superhero origin story, right? When it comes to being a writer and a historian, everyone has that point where they wanted to break through and learn more about a topic. For you, it was when you read Southern Food at Home, on the Road, in History by John Egerton.
Yeah.
So there was a part, the author believed that there had yet to be written a true tribute to Black achievement in the American culinary scene.
Yeah.
So if we fast forward to right now, do you think that gap has been filled somewhat? Do you think there has been quality work that has been done? And how far do we have to go until you feel like that gap has been, until you feel like we're at a good place?
No, I think we've made a lot of progress on that in the last 15 years. So when I first started looking at the subject, there wasn't really much written. In fact, when what launched this journey was unemployment.
Oh,
I was
right.
I was in between the Clinton administration, and at that time in my life, I wanted to be the senator from Colorado. So I was trying to get back to Colorado and start my political career, but the job market was really slow. I was watching a lot of daytime television. I'm not even going to tell you what shows.
Oh, I mean, now you got to tell me.
Yeah, no. And in the depth of my depravity, I said, I should read something. So that's what got me to Egerton's book. So I would say, so there wasn't much written. And when I reached out to food writers, when I decided to start this journey, a lot of the food writers told me, hey, look, there's not much on African Americans. This country's racist. You're just not going to find that much stuff. Now, the people I talked to were of a certain demographic, so they hadn't really heard of this thing called the internet. And with the internet, I mean, I quickly had enough information to write 5 books.
Wow.
So, but in that time, Jessica B. Harris, and if you all have seen Netflix High on the Hog, yeah, great series. I think it was #2 on Netflix overall during the Memorial Day weekend. So if you haven't seen it, check it out. But it's a look at the history of African American food. Jessica B. Harris was certainly the pioneer kind of in this field. So her book, and then that High on the Hog series, and then other people like Michael Twitty, Tony Tipton Martin. And Michael Twitty is interesting because he's talking about antebellum foodways as well as he's Black, gay, and Jewish. And so he's talking about the connection. I know. He's talking about the connections of all of those things. And Tony Tipton Martin has certainly written a lot. So there's a lot more food writing happening.
Yeah.
But we still have a ways to go because there's so many stories that remain untold.
Yeah,
So.
you're right. It is a space that has a ton of talent, yourself included. So we're going to stay back in the backstory part. So your first full-time job was at Luther's Barbecue in Aurora, Colorado, which, it burned down, like you said.
Not by me.
Yeah. Adrian didn't burn it down. Let me rephrase that.
Yeah.
But at that time, you were working as a dishwasher, cleaning tables, and that played a part in your development and interest in barbecue. So I wanted to know, as a dishwasher and a busser, is there anything that is a cardinal sin to leave unfinished on your plate at a barbecue restaurant?
So for me, it's the barbecue spare rib because that's my touchstone. That's my go-to thing. So to see an untouched spare rib, I mean, because look, cooking is an act of love, right? I mean, when somebody cooks for you, They're saying they care about your survival. It's
Right.
sustenance.
Right.
Even if the food is straight nasty, right? The act of doing that is meaningful. So, just find that food for somebody. If you're not feeling it, just get it to somebody else.
Yeah, yeah.
So they could savor that.
Yeah.
So,
So basically, clean your plate.
Yeah.
That's essentially what it
Clean
comes
your
down
plate.
to. And so we're going to stay in the backstory part. I've also been curious about this. Like you talk about this in the book. This is in the earlier stages. You're an official barbecue judge, but you also admit like your shortcomings when it comes to barbecue. I think you were like, your pork shoulder might not be on point, like the brisket, you still got to learn the game of that one. But, being a judge too, and also knowing your shortcomings, is that a crucial element to being able to understand what makes barbecue special? Like knowing what your flaws are in that same space.
yeah, because great barbecue comes through the trial and error process. So, you got to just put in the time and make those mistakes and learn from it. I mean, Matt Horn will tell you that because he's self-taught for the most part. So he'll tell you about all the stuff that you've messed up. So yeah, at this point in my journey, I'm much better at eating barbecue than cooking it. But I endeavor to say
Yeah.
that.
And so, all right, we're gonna go a little bit to barbecue on a more personal level. And one of the things, so language is important, as you know, as a writer. Should we or should we not be using the term pit masters, or what's the phrase that you would like to use? Because
So I like the term barbecuer, and I use that intentionally in the book to stay away from that idea of pit master. But one thing to understand is that pit master is a very recent term, relatively speaking, with barbecue. Barbecue's been around several centuries. Pit master really didn't come into the language until the 1950s or so. And Daniel Vaughn, who's the barbecue editor of Texas Monthly Magazine, is the one who kind of dug that up. So back in the day, say in the 1900s, 1800s, they would call them superintendents. So you were superintending a barbecue. And then later it became barbecue man, because most of them were men. And then only later, and then it was barbecue king. Everybody was calling themselves barbecue king, because self-promotion is a huge part of barbecue. So they were as numerous as Saudi Arabian princes, those Nigerian princes who keep emailing us. Yeah. So that was all part of the culture. So I prefer barbecuer.
okay, I like that.
Yeah, and another reason why I do that is because, as you find out in my book, there's a strong association with slavery.
Yeah.
So, I keep thinking about that, but that's why I use barbecuer.
That's a really, really good point. And you've talked about this before as well. So I want to touch on like that painful racist part of, which is weaved into everything in America, but with barbecue. And you talked about how like in the book, how barbecue talent among slaves was a point of plantation owner pride, right? But also at this time, plantation owners would whip slaves. They would cover, like when this happened, they would cover them in barbecue sauce. In Jim Crow era, there were lynchings called Negro barbecues. And then also during Jim Crow, white restaurant owners objectified the black barbecue style, like by forcing cooks to the margins through and using these like caricatures of like Aunt Jemima or something like that. So I grew up in Louisiana. Grew up below the Mason-Dixon line. There are a ton of and this, eating around the country. Like a small town, there are a ton of barbecue spots and soul food restaurants where the owners might lean into this, right? Like lean into this kind of like stereotype at some point. Not to say they're behaving this way, but they don't mind like being called Big Mama or something like that.
Yeah.
Do you think us being able to take control of a narrative like that, is that empowerment by using the character for our economic advantage, or do you not want to see that kind of style of restaurant or brand of restaurant? Like what's your what do you think?
Yeah, no, I'm about reclaiming things, because I think by reclaiming it, we can take the sting out of certain things. So, one thing this is not necessarily barbecue,
right?
But the way that fried chicken and watermelon have become so toxic, I definitely want us to reclaim that, because it's some of the most delicious stuff on the planet. But that there's a lot of reasons why those stereotypes cause harm.
Yeah.
But to give just a little bit of context, what a lot of people don't know is that I believe that barbecue is made possible by by enslaved labor, because barbecue, old school barbecue, was very labor intensive. You had to dig a trench, a couple feet wide, a couple feet deep. You had to fill that trench with with hardwood burning coals. Animals had to be slaughtered and processed and butterflied, poles stuck on them, and then somebody had to flip that through the cooking, and somebody had to replenish the coals in the fire. And, it just goes on. And then not only that, after all that work was done, the prep work and all this stuff, then enslaved African Americans were asked to entertain. So it was a black experience from beginning to end. Yeah. But the thing that's key here is that old school barbecue was scalable. So in the early 1800s, you're reading about barbecues for 10,000, 20,000 people. Right. You don't hear about fried chicken dinners for 10,000, right? Because the logistics are they're impossible. But it's possible with barbecue and enslaved labor. So by the time you get to the early 1800s, like 1830s or so, you're getting newspaper articles saying legitimate barbecue, you need to have a Negro man or colored man, the language of the time, do X, Y, or Z. So we're like part of the recipe.
Yeah,
that's how wedded we are.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah. It's so interesting that you brought up the idea of like consuming chicken or watermelon like in a public space. I've thought it makes me think of, like, there's this Dave Chappelle joke that he did during stand-up one time where he was eating chicken in public, and he said, like, a white person saw him and they were like, just like in the encyclopedia, I read about this, he loves it. And so he gets like self-conscious about it, right? And so me personally, I also think about that. I also think about like consuming watermelon in a space where it's not predominantly black.
But here's one interesting thing, though.
Yeah.
If you go back and look at the literature of the 1870s and 80s, when these stereotypes are getting power, catfish, barbecue were all part of it.
Yeah,
some of the most racist stuff is about barbecue, but we don't hold the same stigma for barbecue now.
That leads me perfectly to this, because I was wondering that same thing. I don't feel self-conscious, like if I'm eating barbecue in a space that isn't predominantly filled with people that look like us. I don't think none of my friends, none of my family members. What is it about? Is it a communal aspect, or why is that food different? Because you're still at some points eating chicken. You're still at some points, why is that different? Why is barbecue different?
I haven't unpacked that because I'm looking back over time, and some of the barbecue stereotypes were just as pernicious. I think it's just, if you were to have a scale, I think the tonnage of crap about fried chicken and watermelon just far exceeds barbecue.
I got you.
I just think it's that.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So I do love sometimes when you reference things that you've said to other well-known people, especially writers. So you once told John Grisham, when he asked you what's the difference between black and white barbecue, your response was simply, black barbecue tastes better, right? I respect it, I was like, okay. That also made me spit out my coffee when I was reading it. So, all right, let's say, let's make that blanket, let's say that blanket statement is true. What can be said about the visual, the aesthetic qualities of black barbecue that makes it different from, if there is, from white barbecue, I guess.
Yeah, I knew this was going to be hard to kind of write this chapter and kind of prove my point.
Yeah.
So, but I just think after you've eaten a lot of barbecue made by African Americans, there's a certain visual aspect, like you're expecting to see char. The meat is not as butchered. So, for instance, spare ribs, that's my touchstone. So in a black joint, you're not going to see St. Louis cut ribs that often. And the St. Louis cut is this. The ribs are ovular in their shape, and so the St. Louis cut is taking off the tips and just trying to create a more rectangular, uniform look. Black joints, you're going to see the rib tip attached. You might even see that flap on the back of ribs. That it's just less butchering and more fat. And also highly seasoned, and definitely without a doubt sauce. So there's this emerging conventional wisdom that barbecue should be unsauced. I'm going to go out on a limb and say most black people would say, says who, right? Thank you, all right. So black people backing me up, I like that. Because I've been to black barbecue joints where you get your plate and it's an ocean of sauce with little islands of meat poking
Little
through.
tiny, yeah.
Because the sauce is the calling card. I got an email today from some guy. He's just like, I loved your book. My dad ran a barbecue joint in Ithaca, New York.
Yeah.
He's been gone for 30 years, but people still talk about the sauce.
Yeah.
They're not talking about the meat. They're
Yeah.
talking about the sauce.
There's so my family lived in Jackson, Mississippi for a little while, and there's this place called, I think it was like E&L's Barbecue, little hole-in-the-wall place. And I remember they would do the rib tips and give you a bowl of it, and you would have to be like,
Yep.
Is there meat in here?
Right.
It would used to just be the sauce, just about.
Right. And there are a lot of old school barbecue joints that would just give you sauce and bread.
Yeah.
And part of that was for poor customers who couldn't afford to have the meat. But that shows you how important sauce is. Yeah.
So that's a perfect way to lead to this. So the interesting thing and we've talked about how complicated the discussions of barbecue history are, but let's talk about the taste of barbecue. Everyone has their favorite places, and there's no real 100% consensus, I think, about what someone's favorite restaurant is in a city compared to someone else's. They might not agree on that. So is there a such thing as consistency in the creation of a barbecue? Or is it the fallible nature, I guess, of the exercise that makes it so unique? Like, do you almost not want it to be perfect, and that's what makes it perfect,
So are we talking about in African American context or just in general?
Let's say African American context, yeah.
I think that everybody has a signature. In Chinese culture, it's called wok presence. So you bring something and you make a dish. So I think people are expecting that. So the way you phrased it, that's interesting. I wish I had thought of that for my book. But this idea that as imperfect as it is, because often African American barbecue is going to be messier. Because I think about a lot of spots that are celebrated, they're white owned. The meat comes out, it's perfectly manicured. Right. It's just social media ready, right? In a lot of black joints, it's going to be chopped up, white bread, sauce on it, maybe all wrapped together with fries and drowned in sauce, So I think it's more that kind of the imperfect part of it. They're like, this is this person's signature,
right?
And I'm going to gobble it up.
We definitely have those places that are like, it was cool on Tuesday. It wasn't that great on Friday, but I'm gonna go back on Saturday.
Right.
Like,
or you call and ask who's cooking, right?
Yeah, that's right.
That's important.
That's right.
Yeah.
Who's working in the kitchen?
Yeah.
Nah, I'm gonna come back.
Yeah.
Later.
And I hate to say this, it seems to happen more in black joints.
Yeah.
There's gonna be out of stuff, right? Oh, can I get this? Oh, Mrs. So didn't feel like making it today.
Oh
right.
yeah.
All right.
Or you know the time frame to
you know what? I should bring you all on the road with me.
Right. Adrian and I are just going to turn this into a comedy. It's a stand-up bit about black restaurants. No, I think you're absolutely right. All right, so before we get too far off track, all right, now we can talk about the book. And I want to start about this because we talked on the phone the other day, and I just want to start at this point. Your book does an amazing job of so many things, but one of them is highlighting the influence of black women in barbecue in this country. And, we can talk about from Kansas City, from Deborah and Mary Jones to Helen Turner in Brownsville to Sylvie Curry in Los Angeles. Like but I want to give you the space right now to talk about that.
Right. Well, so barbecue is often presented as an all-boys club, right? The masculinity is just dripping. One of the jokes I wrote in my book is I'm surprised somebody hasn't created I better not say a joke. But anyway, even in my own family, my mom, my late mother, she was the griller in chief. It's only later in life that my dad really took over the barbecue duties after my mom died. But in my book, I give a lot of profiles of people who I think really evoke the themes of a chapter. And one of the most fascinating people I came across was a woman named Mary John. But her birth name was Marie Jean because she was born when Arkansas was French territory. But in 1840s in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, there is a newspaper account of her superintending a barbecue. And so that's the term for pitmaster back then. And so she ends up buying her freedom, stays in Arkansas, runs a restaurant, highly regarded, and when she dies, the white newspaper eulogizes her. So dig that, a black woman telling dudes what to do in 1840s Arkansas. So that just shows you how deep black women run in barbecue. And then, I find these figures over time. Yeah. And even if a place is not run by a black woman, a lot of these men who are running spots will tell you, oh yeah, this is my grandmother's sauce recipe, or my mother taught me to do it. Sometimes the restaurants are named after women. So I just wanted to really make that point that black women have been in the barbecue game for a long time. Like I say, sisters have been grilling it for themselves for a long time.
Can you talk about your mom ran the show during barbecues. Can you talk about that a little bit? Like, what, did she have a specialty? Was there anything?
Oh yeah, so she made the ribs. So we were more of a ribs, chicken, and hot link kind of family.
All right.
So that's my trinity. And then we would have other stuff for kids, right? Hamburgers, bratwurst, and all that kind of stuff. But some of the fondest memories of her, the sauce. So my grandmother had her own sauce recipe actually, which I found as going through my mom's stuff. So I found the handwritten recipe, which was really cool. But I'm letting out some secrets here. A lot of people just doctor commercial sauces and call it their sauce.
No.
So I have fond memories of my mom taking open pit. I don't know if you ever heard of open pit barbecue, and then cutting a lemon and putting in there with that other spices. So I have fond memories of just passing by on July 4th and seeing this lemon floating in the barbecue sauce, and it was pretty slamming.
I love that. That's amazing. So maybe this is like we're gonna keep on this line, but thinking about Black businesses, and I want to make sure that I was trying to figure out how to work in a pandemic-related question, and I figure I'll just shoehorn it in right here. But, and I'm sure you saw this too, Adrian, like at some point, like the pandemic took a heavy toll on Black businesses in this country, and I remember it was like early on, it was like 40% or something were either closing or on the brink of closing. And then we had a year of social unrest and people calling for, racial justice, Black Lives Matter, which has been doing work for years, got an even bigger stage right now. Out here in the Bay Area, we had a moment where people were, called to go support Black businesses, right? And they saw like an uptick in support, and probably it didn't last that long for many of them. But I'm curious to, like, do you think this moment is going to have a lasting impact? This desire for people to do something positive, like we have good, people, well-intended people out here in the Bay Area that aren't Black that want to support these businesses. Do you think that's going to last? And can that, coupled with a post-pandemic desire to be in communal spaces for everybody, right? Like we all want to get together.
Right.
Like, could this be a benefit down the line to Black businesses, or do you think?
Oh, definitely. And I think one reason why is that the attention is still being paid. Because typically in the past, we've had communal moments around grief or tragedy, right? And usually the energy lasts for a couple months and it dissipates. Right. And I haven't really seen that.
Right.
We're more than a year out, and there are still people reading the books, asking the questions. What I'm finding is a lot of people outside the Black community are wondering, well, what can we do next? And are looking for actually practical suggestions on next steps. So I think ways to support businesses will be helpful. I just did a presentation the other day, and people were asking, well, is there a list of these Black businesses in Denver that we could support? The Colorado Restaurant Association has a program where they're giving select businesses gift cards. And the idea is that a customer comes, you give them a $25 gift card that will have them come back. And the card's already paid for, right? Or you could give it to somebody else, right? And so I think we have to be vigilant and keep telling people these are ways to support Black businesses in this time. So I think there is going to be some energy around that, but we have to keep that fire burning.
Right.
But one thing that's interesting about barbecue, so I'm going to say something that's going to sound in conflict, but one of my favorite Black-owned barbecue joints in Denver did close because of the pandemic. But I think it's because they had a big space that relied a lot on in-person dining and a bar. I think a lot of Black-owned barbecue joints are takeout. So
that's a good point.
I'm thinking that maybe they're doing all right.
That's a very, very good point. Yeah. Especially down south, I imagine too. Like those are a lot of like little takeout, stop in real quick joints. That's a very good point.
Now there's another side of that, right, that reflects injustice because Black entrepreneurs often don't get enough capital, so that they can invest and have a sit-down place, right? So they're doing the best they can with the resources they have.
Let alone afford a liquor license,
right?
Which out here, secondary market, they're crazy expensive. Yeah, that's a very, very good point. All right, so we're gonna get a little granular here, and we talked a little bit about it a second ago. So you make the argument in this book about barbecue techniques and how they didn't migrate from the Caribbean as European colonists and move north. There's also a suggestion that America's barbecue is more homegrown, borrowed from Native Americans. And also in the book, you talk about how they used rotating spits, raised platforms, the shallow pits, the vertical holes to cook their wild game. And then also, at the same time, this is a long question. At the same time, you say there's little evidence to support the theory that American barbecue can trace its roots to West Africa. And so I won't go too deeply into that, but that was something that we talked about earlier. Fellow food writer and historian Michael Twitty couldn't endorse. There was a story, and he was like, I just can't, I don't know if I can get down with that thinking. What has the reception been, or have you been getting pushback from other people within your writer community who look like you about this? Because you dropped a lot of knowledge.
Yeah.
And I imagine that some people are going to be like, some other black writers are going to be like, I don't know about that, man.
Yeah. So actually, the most criticism I've gotten in that realm has been from other African Americans. And look, trust me, I wanted to prove without a doubt that barbecue was West African in origin. I wanted to do this and say Wakanda forever. But, I'm in a literary tradition, and so I look at sources, and right now the available sources do not suggest that.
Right.
And there's a couple reasons why. First of all, Europeans were in West Africa at least a century before they got to Americas. There's no documentation of this type of cooking. What we do know that happened is when Europeans show up in the Caribbean and they see this type of cooking, they talk about this as if it's something they've never seen before. Mm-hmm. And they write about it and make illustrations about it. These illustrations cause a sensation in Europe. And they had the same kind of view of Africans before. So I'm curious as to why that didn't happen.
Right.
The second thing is West Africans don't even cook like that today. Mm-hmm. If you look at West African barbecue, it's more street food, skewers with chunks of meat, highly seasoned. And so this whole animal cooking that evolves in the South, it doesn't show up. So what I did is, because barbecue history is so hazy, and it's problematic, and I think there's a good criticism to say, well, you're relying on Europeans for this, but of the three major players in this, Native Americans, West Africans, and Europeans, the Europeans are the only ones that have a literary tradition. Mm-hmm. Everybody else is oral history. Mm-hmm. So it's just kind of hard to figure out what's going on. So I just relied on what Europeans said they saw, and it's problematic because looking at the sources, they weren't always good at the descriptions, and then there are a lot of times they had an agenda. Because like the earliest barbecue scenes were just fish of the raised platform in the Caribbean. So Columbus and crew in the 1490s, they see Caribbean people cooking over a very slow fire on a raised platform, and on that platform were fish and vegetables and iguanas. Okay. When the Europeans with an agenda start writing about barbecue a couple decades later, because they're bent on conquest and dehumanizing the indigenous people in the Caribbean, all of a sudden human limbs start showing up on the barbecue grill, right? So it's problematic. But there were several techniques that were seen in the American South, and pit barbecue, as I described earlier, is different than cooking on that raised platform. So to me, something else was going on. And it just looked like Europeans saw something that Native Americans were doing in Virginia, modified, added their quick grilling techniques, and then enslaved Africans get in the mix later. And that puts us on the road to something we call Southern barbecue. So all the people that have called me out, because there have been some people like, you're not a real brother, man. You're saying that Africans didn't, I'm like, all right, look, here are the receipts. This is how I reached the conclusion if you show me.
Yeah.
Nobody has said I'm wrong. They haven't proved it.
Right.
So.
The receipts are a big part. Like,
So I'm just like, write your own book. Prove it. But don't just, because a lot of people are like, well, it's black because I said it so.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, it's funny because when we were going to do this, I was like, man, good for Adrian for writing this book. Damn, Adrian's probably getting a lot of crap for this. Because I know people would want to argue about it. But also, I think that's important to talk about your perspective heading into it. You had a desire to prove something that black people have held true for a long time, right?
Yeah.
But you also were open to evidence showing different. How important is that when it comes to being a food historian? Because I feel like a lot of people might just try to validate something that they already know, but you have to be way more open than that, right? And probably susceptible to being disappointed sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. So, to me, food tells a story, but I think at least I am. I'm on a journey for truth.
I like that.
And I don't think that the fact that somebody else created something doesn't mean that it's wholly part of my culture, and that we did a lot to develop this thing that we all love today. And I don't think those are mutually exclusive. But I'm on a journey for truth.
I like that.
And I'm fascinated by where the story leads me. So.
That's great. All right. So in the book, there's also recipes included, excuse me. And there's one by Henrietta Dole. Am I saying her name?
Yeah.
Who it was Butter Sauce, which was published in this Southern Cooking volume. But anyway, the idea of older recipes, and you also mentioned finding your grandmother's barbecue sauce recipe.
Yeah.
So when it comes specifically to doing a book, what is the process of finding these recipes that might be on, barely legible paper? Like, I imagine the recipe aspect, the recreation, is a journey itself.
It is. So, part of it is finding things in archival sources, sometimes your own family. You can ask people for recipes, but usually what they give you is a lesser P. You've ever heard that term? So that's when somebody purposely leaves out something.
You can't say stuff like that.
Well, that's what
God, that's so funny. A lesser fee?
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to take that.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
So you have that aspect. The boon of in looking through old cookbooks, but what I found is there are not a lot of written recipes by African Americans in cookbooks.
Yeah.
Which was interesting to me because in soul food, Creole food, and other things, there are a lot of written recipes by African Americans. Usually a white person who the African American worked for would describe this recipe. You don't find a lot of those with African Americans in barbecue, and I was always curious about that. And then the boon from my research was old newspapers. So a lot of recipes show up there.
Yeah.
And that Henrietta Dole woman, she's a white woman. And the reason why I included her recipe, because you just don't have a lot of fully described recipes for whole hog cooking the traditional way.
Right.
And then if I can just give a public service announcement, another recipe could be from people you used to date. And so my pro tip is if you are in a relationship with somebody who's a good cook, do what you can to stay with that person. But if you notice that things are getting rocky, I can tell you from personal experience, it's a lot easier to get recipes before you break up.
And so now we transition to the Adrian Miller relationship hour.
It'll be short. It'll be short.
The relationship minute, never mind. I had a question after that, and you made a joke, and it made me completely forget where I was going.
Oh, my bad.
That's all right. All right, so with cookbooks in mind, so now we're going to ease out a little bit. We'll dive back into specifics if we have time. So if there's a cookbook to come out after you have conquered this inability to do pork shoulder and whatnot, what is Adrian Miller's contribution to the recipe book? Is there something that you're good at, something that you would like to see? Like, I got good at this, and then I pass it along. What's your contribution?
So it would definitely be spare ribs.
Okay.
And then also, I would like to have some kind of red drink. Because, you can have a beverage with barbecue. And you have to understand, red's
an important...
red is a color and a flavor
Yeah.
in barbecue, African-American culture.
Yeah.
So we don't call things cherry
It's
or
not
strawberry.
cherry or apple.
Yeah.
It's red
It's just
or it's
red.
purple.
Right.
Yeah.
So I would like to have some kind of red drink. And actually, I have a bomb recipe for a red drink. It's a hibiscus
nice.
based drink.
Yeah.
It's pretty good.
I'm sorry. Some of this stuff just really gets me, and I'm like trying to get back on track.
All right.
Okay. And so I wanted to have a little bit of fun. So whenever I do these things, I would try to find something that's really random that people might not have known about, but something that you might have mentioned in a story before. You used to watch House of Cards, right?
Yes.
Okay. So it got me thinking about black cooks in media. And I read a story where you were talking about in House of Cards, one of your favorite characters was Freddie. And if no one's seen that, Freddie ran a barbecue spot. He was an old friend of the main character. And they wrote it in such a way where you were just like, damn, this food's probably good. You have no idea.
Right.
So there is a part in that show where Freddie meets the main character, Frank. It's like 7:30 in the morning, and Frank orders ribs and eats them all, right? And then orders seconds. I'm curious, Adrian, is 8 a.m. an ungodly hour to eat barbecue, or is there no time frame for when barbecue can be consumed?
There's no time frame.
There's no time frame.
Nah.
So 7:30 is okay.
Yes.
I could not, I didn't mind the scene. I was just like, 8 in the morning.
But that much, that was a little unrealistic. Now, if
Okay.
it had Gates barbecue sauce on it, though,
Oh, okay, solid. I gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. And so while we're on this part as well, so we're going to go to some of your other work. So in 2013, you wrote a book that won a James Beard Award, Soul Food, The Surprising Story of American Cuisine, One Plate at a Time. And for people that aren't in the food world, it's sometimes kind of hard to explain what a James Beard Award is.
Yeah.
So I'm curious how you explained, because this is after your transition out of like what your family probably knew you as in politics and doing something specific and getting into this nebulous world of like food writing. When that award came, that was like a very, very big deal. But how did you explain that to people, and what did that award do for your career itself?
So I told people it's just like winning an Oscar for film
Nice.
or a Grammy for music. And then people are like, oh, okay. So it's interesting. I don't think the James Beard Award means as much to writers as it does to chefs and restaurants.
Yeah.
Because I didn't see an immediate explosion in attention. I mean, it's been a slow build. I've definitely gotten more. I mean, the biggest explosion of attention in my career was actually the High on the Hog appearance. Yeah. So, but it gave me street cred, and it led to other things. So that was definitely the case. But you know, it was thrilling because I never expected that.
Yeah.
In fact, going into that, I had practiced two things: my acceptance speech, and then my fake. Oh, I'm so happy you won instead of me.
That's
Look,
good.
you
Right,
know,
right.
When they zoom in on you, right? So, and I thought it was going to be the latter because that was my first book, so I didn't expect to win. So.
You know, and so now you're at a point where you've done. I mean, and I think that, you know, this one's destined for the same kind of treatment. Like it's such a thorough breakdown of such a complicated topic. But it almost feels like, and I know for you it probably feels like forever, but for me, thinking of these books, there's not a huge gap of time between them in my head with all of the work that you do.
Yeah.
But can you talk about the work that goes into this? Because making something look easy doesn't mean it's easy. So
Right.
can you talk about like the research?
So I've only had a few strokes of genius in my life, and I had one in this case. When I started researching the Soul Food book, I just grabbed all the information I could about everything, and I included barbecue. So that lessened the time, because the first book took about 12 years. And in that course of 12 years, and that's because I had a day job, so it was like a side hustle, right?
I see.
I was like a grad student, evenings, weekends working on it. I read 3,500 oral histories of formerly enslaved people.
Wow.
Looking for all references for food. I read thousands of newspaper articles and magazines articles, because we have the Library of Congress and companies are now digitizing these things. Some go back to the 1300s, and you can, they're word searchable. I talked to hundreds of people, and then because I care so much about my craft, I decided to eat my way through the country.
Obviously, right.
Yeah.
It's a burden you have
Right,
to carry.
exactly.
Of course.
And when I do, I call people who help me out, since I'm a soul food scholar, I call them research assistants.
Oh, nice.
So
Yeah.
I'm always on the lookout for research assistants.
Oh, wow.
And so it was really, so the second book took 4 years, this one took about 3. And it really, because I had that solid foundation of that research before that I could draw upon. So I didn't have to start from scratch.
I got you. You know, and there are people who talk about, you know, for this process, you know, I drove across the country and ate at places, but there is a method to the madness. You're not just going into a city and like picking around, or are you? Like what goes into that journey across the country? I imagine that there's some kind of formula to it.
Well, I would love that. I'm always jealous of these people that just drive around, because I'm too broke to do that. So
Can't waste money.
Yeah, I had to focus my trips. So I said, okay, well, where am I likely to get the great barbecue stories? And I didn't get to everywhere I wanted to just because of lack of resources, and then the pandemic did cut that short. So my strategy was this. I have a really good social media following. So I would just put it out there. Hey, I'm thinking about going to this place. Where should I eat? So that's the first cut. The second cut is I actually reached out to the food writers in certain cities
That's smart.
and asked them for their spots. Now, sadly, they weren't up on a lot of the black joints. No, believe it or not. So that wasn't.
way.
I didn't get a lot, but when I did get it, it was a gold mine. And then the other thing is, I actually did look at things like Yelp and TripAdvisor, not because I really believe what the people are writing there, but I just thought if a place was heavily commented upon, it's a place I probably should check out.
Right.
And then if I could, I always left a couple of days, because it's just when you get into a place, you just find out about all those joints. And, you know, it's just a matter of fact, a lot of African-American joints don't have a strong digital presence. So they
That's
don't
a
have
very
a they don't have a vibrant website. They're not on social media. So you just got to get to the community and find that. And that's one thing I tell all the African American business owners who want, if they want my advice, I'm just like, you got to get your social media game tight,
That's a very good
because
point.
that's how people are finding you now.
Yeah. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Even outside of barbecue, in my years of writing about restaurants out here, I saw how Instagram influenced the aesthetics of businesses. They would literally put in a space where people could go take a photo, tag them, and it was huge for their business,
Yeah.
dedicated space for it. Has it's gonna sound like, us shouting at a cloud or something, but has social media hurt Black businesses, helped Black businesses? Like this influence, this idea that you need to get the perfect shot of food, because some of these places, the food can be amazing, it might not be photogenic.
Right.
So
Yeah. So I think it's a double-edged sword. So one thing, the Black businesses that have figured this piece out, they're doing well and they're thriving.
Right.
I think the downside of it is what you just said. Like I said earlier, a lot of Black barbecue is messy. And so it's not Instagrammable. And then the other thing is, because so many white joints are doing that, people are coming to barbecue. They're believing that's what legit barbecue is. And so, I've posted pictures from Black joints and people are like, there's too much sauce on there or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I know where that's coming from. And then the other thing is it's having real consequences for these Black businesses, because with the ascendancy of, say, Central Texas barbecue, focused on brisket and that kind of, now people are walking into Black joints across the country who are traditionally pork-based, and they're asking, where's the brisket?
Oh, wow.
And if it's not on the menu, they're walking out, because they've gotten the message that's what great barbecue is. So now these Black barbecuers are responding in two different ways. Some are just like, all right, this is what I do. Others are like, oh man, I can't lose these customers. Let me start making brisket. And I got to tell you, there's a lot of mediocre brisket being made.
Oh wow, that's interesting. I never thought about the influence of. Wow, yeah, that's super interesting.
Right. So I don't get an attitude when somebody brags about their favorite tradition. I get an attitude when someone says this is the only way to make legitimate barbecue.
Yeah.
Because then it excludes all of these other traditions.
Yeah.
And my tagline about a lot of this stuff is there's room at the cookout for everyone. So don't stop saying this is the only way to do it. Let's start talking about, well, this is how I do it, but there's other ways that people do it.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
What is something? What do you want people to take away from this book? If you were stuck on an elevator and had to explain to them what you wanted them to walk away with after they read it, what is that?
I would say that Black Smoke is a celebration of African American barbecue culture. It's a restoration of African Americans to the barbecue narrative, because unfortunately a lot of barbecue media, African Americans are pushed to the sidelines or left out entirely. And it's a pushback on the idea that barbecue media has fallen deeply, madly, softly, tenderly in love with white dudes who barbecue. And those are presented as the barbecue experts. And really quickly, the archetypes that I point out in my book is you got the Bubba type, the working class, rural kind of white guy. You've got the competition guy. You've got the urban hipster, interesting facial hair, glasses, tattoos, piercings. And then you have the toke who smokes. So you've got the fine dining chefs who are now in barbecue in a way they never were 2 decades ago.
Right.
And then the last thing I want is just, if you get invited to a Black barbecue, don't show up with raisins in your coleslaw or your potato salad.
So I'm gonna. We were having such a good time. I forgot to give us the 10-minute warning. If you have, we're gonna be answering questions in a couple of minutes. Sorry for the late notification. But if you have questions for Adrian, could you please now begin quietly lining up in the back, and we'll get to them. I gotta admit, this is the most fun I've had in a while.
Oh,
But
good.
This is a blast. And so, okay. While we have that, just the topical, have you had a chance to eat around? Actually, let me ask you this. We've been able to put descriptions on regions of barbecue. Have you thought about, is there a Bay Area type of barbecue, or is it just kind of the homogenization of a bunch?
Yeah,
of
it's an
things?
amalgamation.
Yeah.
I just see, I have not picked up a distinctive Bay Area barbecue vibe.
Yeah.
I just haven't seen it. And I think part of it is great migration story. You've got people that have shown up here from a lot of different places. And so I have not seen that. But that doesn't mean that it could not develop.
Right, it could.
I think one thing that might be interesting that could be distinctively Bay Area is vegan barbecue. I went to Vegan Mob yesterday. You've got Chef Bryant Terry here.
Bryant Terry,
and there's a lot of interesting things happening with vegan in this area. So, and this comes from a guy who I want to create a Denver barbecue style. Because 100 years ago, we were known for lamb and bison. In fact, if you go to a knowledgeable butcher and ask for a Denver rack, they're going to give you lamb ribs.
Really?
Yeah, but we just got away from it, so I'm trying to bring that back. And one thing you find out when you get into barbecue culture, as much as we talk about tradition, there's an artifice to it that, you could start something. It's just a matter of you just got to get enough people on board in order to say that that's a regional style. So in the Q&A, if people think there is a Bay Area style, I would love to hear that, but I just don't see one.
Yeah.
I just see I see elements from other places that show up here.
The vegan part is very, very interesting. There's another place in Oakland that I'll tell you about before we part. Okay, so we're at 0 minutes, and so let's answer some audience questions.
Gentlemen, this has been a gas. Thank you. Could you say just a few more words about what you drink with all this barbecue, besides the red stuff?
No, that's it. No, so it just depends on where you are. But in places like Texas, for instance, Juneteenth, you're supposed to have a red drink because in Juneteenth, red foods symbolize the blood shed by ancestors. So barbecue is red by sauce. You have watermelon as dessert, and then red drink, mainly Big Red from Waco, Texas, or some kind of strawberry soda. But through a lot of the Deep South, it's really sweet tea and lemonade that you'll find a lot. In fact, there's a writer named Fred Thompson who has argued that the sweetness of the tea varies based on the barbecue sauce. So if you're in the Carolinas with that more vinegary, you're going to have sweeter tea, where the spoon stands straight up. And then if you go other places, it's going to be, less sweet. So a lot of black-run barbecue joints, and I think it's maybe a reflection of not having a liquor license, or also, a lot of black business owners are religious, and so maybe they just don't want to have alcohol in their place. But it's usually soft drinks. So it's going to be tea, like some kind of sweet tea or iced tea, red drink, and lemonade. That's what I see the most. Yes?
So I just wanted to see if you could touch on a little the differences between, say, Carolina barbecue or Texas barbecue, Kansas City barbecue, and what about those places develop that style of barbecue?
Yeah, okay, so I'll try to do this really quickly. So the Carolinas, Virginia and Carolinas, I argue is the birthplace of barbecue as we understand it, whole hog. So in the eastern parts of that state, it's gonna be whole hog and pretty much vinegar with red pepper. So that was the earliest barbecue sauce. And it's really unfair to call it a sauce because it was added throughout the barbecuing process. So it's really a flavor enhancer. And a lot of people have an attitude about North Carolina barbecue because of the vinegar. And I would say that you probably have had bad North Carolina barbecue, because if you have a barbecue made by somebody who knows what they're doing, there's a depth of flavor that's pretty amazing. So then as you move to the western part of the state, North Carolina, you get more ketchup added to the sauce, and then it's more about pork shoulders rather than whole hog cooking. And that introduction of some ketchup and tomato in those sauces shows the gradual adoption of tomatoes. Because for a long time, people wouldn't eat tomatoes because they thought it was poisonous because it's part of the nightshade family. And so then you go to South Carolina, you have pork shoulder and whole hogs, and then you've got a bunch of different sauces. You've got the vinegar, you've got some mustard, you've got some tomato. Then there's Deep South, pork shoulder, ribs, chicken, with a kind of sweet, thin, tomato-based sauce, and Southern soul food sides. Then we get to Kentucky, where you have a lamb-based barbecue, mutton, with the Worcestershire sauce. It's pretty unique. It's very hyper-local. You've got Memphis, which is a really eclectic place, showing the, wet or dry ribs. And dry ribs are really a seasoning. It's not really a method. It's just this one guy, Charlie Vrogos, at the Rendezvous decided to add Greek seasoning to slabs of ribs. And all of a sudden, that's a dry, but that's just that one place. I don't know anybody else who does that. And then a shoulder sandwich with coleslaw and stuff. But then Memphis has got some cool stuff because they got barbecue spaghetti. If you've never heard of barbecue spaghetti,
right.
noodles, barbecue sauce instead of marinara, and grilled meat. Oh, you're shaking your head, but you haven't. You need to experience this.
It's on point. It's
Yeah.
good. It's good.
And barbecue bologna. Yeah, this is awesome too. And then, in Texas, you have 3 different styles. So when people say Texas barbecue, they're really talking about Central Texas usually, which is a reflection of Central European immigrants landing in that spot, bringing their meat smoking traditions. And so a lot of these early barbecue joints were actually just butcher shops, and they started smoking the stuff they couldn't sell. And then they started selling it to ranch hands and agricultural workers around. So that's the earliest Central Texas barbecue stand. But in the south of Texas, you've got the Latino barbacoa tradition, more earth ovens. And then in East Texas, you've got heavily African-American influenced barbecue because slaveholders brought enslaved African-Americans to that part in the 1820s and 30s. And we have on record African-Americans doing Southern barbecue. Another region that doesn't get much love is south side of Chicago. Rib tips, chicken, hot link sausages with fries. We got St. Louis. St. Louis, they've got not only the ribs, but also something called snoots, which are pig snouts, not for everybody. And then turkey ribs. That's another thing that's come out of St. Louis. And turkey ribs are taking the shoulder blade, cutting enough meat around it so it looks kind of like a rib. And so that comes out of St. Louis. And then Kansas City, agricultural town, so you've got a real mix of pork, beef, mutton, all kinds of stuff showing up there. So to me, those are the major traditions. Outside of that, you've got hyper-local stuff. Like in Santa Maria, California, you've got the tri-tip tradition cooked over red oak. So there are things that pop up. But those are I would say, the main styles. Yeah.
Earlier, you brought up that barbecues reached historically sizes of thousands of people, but also in your book you mentioned that it was part of small family gatherings. It doesn't seem to be something that you eat by yourself, so what does that say about community and the heart of barbecuing?
Oh yeah, so barbecue commands community. So the early, when you're cooking a whole animal, you have to have a lot of people get together and eat it, especially at a time when there's no refrigeration. And so that's why I think barbecue emerged as the perfect party food. And the people that figured out barbecue draws a crowd early on were politicians and preachers. Because that's where you see a lot of these gatherings. They figure out, if I make this barbecue, I can get a lot of people here. Maybe they'll do something I want them to do, like vote for me or join my church. And so we see that. But there's also this other part of barbecue that emerges as, building family, which is a different type of community. And here's the interesting thing. The regional traditions that we fight about so much that I went through, focusing on smaller cuts of meat, those are really only about a century old. For 2 centuries, it was whole hog cooking. And then as we shift from a rural context to an urban context, cooking a whole animal doesn't make sense all the time in an urban context. So that's when we start to focus on ribs, pork shoulder, brisket, and then there was a huge wave of innovation that leads to a lot of these styles. So I think the family aspect of barbecue emerges with that kind of smaller cooking. And then when the 1950s, when people have backyards and they can do this, and there's a vibrant public park tradition of cooking barbecue. I think that all comes together. Yeah.
Great. If nobody else here has a question, we are going to answer some from our live stream on YouTube. So we have 2. One, can you please comment at all on Asian-style barbecue, specifically Korean barbecue? It's now gained a lot of steam in the United States.
Yeah. So the Asian styles, I hope people don't get mad. I would call more like grilling than I would describe barbecue. And that's one thing that I've been getting pushback about, because some people are saying, well, barbecue is the same all over the world. Yeah. Because it's cooking, it's meat, flame, and wood. And I said, well, yeah, but then how come all these people are showing up in the U.S. trying to learn how to do this? So to me, the Asian styles like yakitori and other things, I think of those as just kind of grilling traditions. But one thing that is undeniable is that with the popularity of barbecue over the last couple of decades, there is now a real desire to explore global grilling traditions. And I think that's, the Asian barbecue that we have is just awesome. And I think that's, feeding that desire. And I think as we start, I think we're going to have more exploration of grilling traditions around the world. So I think it's an exciting time for barbecue. But I just want to maintain, I think that Southern barbecue has an exceptional quality.
And this is going to be our last audience question. How can we bring more Black chefs and their historical food knowledge to the publishing world's attention?
Good question. So Rodney Scott, who's a person, if you're into barbecue, or if not, you're just somebody you need to know. Rodney Scott is a barbecuer from Hemingway, South Carolina, and he's doing whole hog barbecue, and he's got a spot now in Charleston, Birmingham. He's just opening one up in Atlanta. He came out with a book called Rodney Scott's World of Barbecue. It is the first book published by a black barbecuer in 3 decades. Now think about all the books that come out, right? So one thing that I think is going to spark this is, first of all, gobble up all the books by African Americans, because these publishers are looking at sales. And if they see Rodney Scott's book doing well, they see my book doing well, they will, commission other books. The other thing is just social media. Start following African Americans in barbecue circles, because now, sadly, there are publishers that are looking at social media engagement before they give book deals.
Oh, wow.
So, what you all can help is start amplifying people you like, and that will get them in that space.
All right. So we have one last question. Thank you to our audience for all of your great questions, by the way. But to Adrian, here's the last thing. And this is a tradition here, by the way, what is your 60-second idea to change the world?
Wow. All right. Pressure's on.
Yeah, something simple just to close this out.
Yeah, so I actually have been thinking about this. So I've been thinking about a concept, and I'm not the only one who's been thinking about this, but I'll claim it. A concept called the welcome table. And so I was thinking about a limited dinner series, guide to difficult conversations. So the first would be a potluck. Y'all come, gather in the space. This is why we're here. Some people aren't going to join. The next one, for lack of a better term, the marginalized group that's affected by the challenge, it's their platform. The third meeting would be a clapback. So all the people who are not part of that marginalized group would say, here's what we heard. This is how we're processing it. And then the last would be a meal where we talk about the journey together. So the food story is this: potluck first, second meeting, everybody else who's outside of the marginalized groups cooks the food of the marginalized group. Third meeting is comfort food, because we're processing stuff. And then the last meeting would be a fusion of all the people who have been part of that journey. So
I love that.
That's what I'm thinking of. So I call it the welcome
Yeah.
table.
That's really good.
Don't steal that. Do not steal that.
Now it's a race to see who can make it first.
I know, yeah,
Just
right.
threw it out there. All right, so I think we're going to close it out. Thank you, Adrian, for joining me today at Inforum at the Commonwealth Club. I would like to remind our audience that Adrian's book, Black Smoke, African Americans in the United States of Barbecue, can be purchased here on site or through your preferred bookseller. If you'd like to watch some more programs or support the Commonwealth Club's efforts in making virtual and in-person programming this year, please visit commonwealthclub.org/online. I'm Justin Phillips, and thank you for being here.